Okay, well, let's get started. It's my privilege to introduce Jo Watson. So, Jo, I'm going to read your bio and then we're going to go to you as we're getting started on the day. So, Jo Watson is a psychotherapist, a trainer, an activist. Her activism is motivated by a belief that emotional distress is caused by what is experienced and largely rooted in social factors. Jo founded the Facebook group Drop the Disorder. She's part of the MAD in the UK team and editor of Drop the Disorder, challenging the culture of psychiatric diagnosis from PCCS books. And we are the Changemakers, poems supporting Drop the Disorder. And just a quick side note, we do have a discount code from PCCS books. So if you don't have those books, definitely click through to the website and we'll be sharing that discount code as well. And Jo is co-founder of AD4E along with Lucy and can be found on Twitter at Drop the Disorder. And Jo has been working day and night for the last few weeks to get this whole day together. So thank you, Jo, for all the hard work that you've put in, and over to you for your introductions.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you for your hard work as well, and Wesley and all the team there at Online Events. We absolutely, quite literally, couldn't do it without you. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, this is our third AD4E online festival. It's so good to see you all. It's always so good to see so many familiar names and faces, really lovely, but also I'm really noticing this year so many new people too. So for lots of people, this is your first AD4E event, so massive welcome to you. And I'm guessing there'll be many and varied reasons as to why you've chosen to join us today, but I'm assuming, I think it's logical to assume that one of those reasons might be that you're dissatisfied and concerned about, unsettled with a culture that is so quick to label and attempt to fix things medically, rather than being open to hearing and responding to the real life stuff that, you know, we all know causes so much emotional distress. Now, for many others, you're here because, well, you support these events and you support the wider discussion, and you have done, many of you, for a very long time. You come to our various gigs throughout the year, the Crucial Conversations events that we have when allies write new books, and the poetry events where people share all kinds of experiences related to a culture of diagnosis and disorder. And you're supportive on social media, and you're often trying to challenge the pathologizing language out there that medicalizes and dehumanizes people. And of course, many of you would have also been at our live events that we did around the country from 2016 to 2020, the early part of 2020. And your support is so valued, and all of your efforts that we know are happening day in, day out in your organisations, in your communities, in your lives generally, to challenge the mainstream narrative. It's all really valued by us and many, many more people, I'm sure. Now, 2 years ago, when we did our first online festival in lockdown, after spending the 4 years before it travelling around, we didn't, to be fair, think then at that point that we'd still be doing them 2 years on, especially when it was like possible to travel and be with people again. But the truth is, although we really miss seeing people in the flesh, we have to acknowledge that the situation has delivered some massive tangible advantages, and they're definitely worth kind of noting and celebrating, really, because our contributors today come from 4 different continents, and our participants come from more than 18 different countries. So it really is a global event, and that's so important because the medicalising and pathologising of people's pain is obviously a global problem, and it's a global problem that has massive impact on people's lives, because labels so often define and control people's lives, often for their whole lives. As many of you will know, the name of the event, A Disorder for Everyone, is a kind of sarcastic statement, really, about the fact that the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, has medicalised human experiences and human distress to such an extent that we all can relate to one set of diagnostic criteria or another if we care to look. So there really is a disorder for everyone. Now, the events are inspired by Lucy Johnston's book, A Straight Talking Introduction to Psychiatric Diagnosis, which I read probably about 6-7 years ago now, at a particularly low point for me when I was frustrated and despairing with what I saw as the mass medicating and pathologizing of people's pain. I was witnessing it both in my personal and professional life on a daily basis. Lucy's book gave me some hope, validation, ideas from the start of AD4E, and I very much wanted the core messages of that book to be part of the events. So the core messages of Lucy's book are very, very simple, very difficult also to imagine anybody disagreeing with them, in my view. They are that people should have a choice about how they understand their own distress. They should not have to accept diagnostic explanations, and there may be other ways of making sense of distress. Now, along the AD4E way, so to speak, many other key messages have been added to the energy of our events, like Pete Sanders' words: "We live in a world where psychiatric diagnosis is assumed to be logical, scientifically sensible and truthful. This is the air we breathe." So we talk about that a lot, the fact that it's just so everywhere, so intrinsic, so part of society. Also, a quote that is really key to what we're talking about here is one that Jackie Dillon and Eleanor Longden made popular, and that is: the main question shouldn't be what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And not forgetting, of course, our very favourite, or one of our favourite psychiatrists, Sami Tamimi, his words that are very much part of the AD4E agenda. Sami said, "Psychiatric diagnosis is subjective opinion masquerading as fact. There's no blood test, there's no brain scan. Basically, it's my opinion against yours." And that's the truth. There is no scientific evidence behind psychiatric diagnosis, whereas there's a mountain of evidence that links what has been experienced to emotional distress. So a disorder for everyone is challenging psychiatric diagnosis and the assumption that emotional distress can be explained medically and biologically. And it really is important to stress that we are not saying that any of this distress that is typically associated with diagnostic categories doesn't exist, because of course it does. But we are questioning whether the diagnostic and medical explanation is the best, most accurate way of understanding it, and definitely challenging the fact that this mainstream narrative is so often imposed as truth with no information about the controversy over its scientific validity. Obviously, Lucy and other speakers today are going to be talking about this in much more detail, so I'm going to leave that detail to them. One of our panels today, a panel that's happening this afternoon, is asking the question, are we on the brink of change? And it's not that I haven't thought about this before, but it got me thinking about it in relation to what I say at the beginning of these events, because usually in the introductions, I'm kind of generally focusing more on the harm and the injustice and all the reasons why we desperately need a different way of understanding and responding. And none of that is any different. That's kind of still the same. And of course, we're going to hear a lot about that today, a lot about the harm, a lot about the injustice. But I wanted to mention some of the hopeful stuff, because all this is real too. So firstly, I am personally so aware of the work that's being done in organisations with people demanding changes in policies and procedures, changes in how the use of language in their workplace. They are, refusing to collude with the language, the medicalised language of psychiatry. And I'm also aware of lots of people who teach on counselling courses in the UK. I'm not so familiar with other countries, but in the UK, I'm familiar with people who are teaching and or they're responsible for training programs in the UK, and they're very consciously, proactively kind of making amendments, adding particular books to the reading lists, encouraging students to attend events like this and check out the AD4E website, YouTube channel, that kind of stuff, and learn more about the debate. So very aware that that is going on a lot. Also, I'm encouraged by the amount of inquiries that I get all the time, asking for recommendations for overtly non-pathologising therapists and supervisors. So people, not just wanting somebody who might be mildly sympathetic to this argument, but somebody who genuinely feels that injustice, understands the harm that imposing labels on people causes to individuals, to communities, to culture generally. Same goes for training. More and more organisations are asking for non-pathologising training. The CPD workshops that we have been offering at AD4E since earlier this year are really popular. It's so encouraging. We're having to repeat workshops all over the place. So the evidence is that people are wanting to learn about stuff. They're wanting to learn about dissociation, hearing voices, abuse and trauma, problems with food and use of substances, all of that stuff people want to learn about. In spaces that aren't pathologising and spaces that are committed to not colluding with the narrative of disorder. And mostly I'm just always inspired every day and encouraged by individuals who sometimes after years of living with a label that they have been given, often without anybody ever asking, you know, what was your life like or what happened, have started to understand their distress and their problems differently, and they're reclaiming their own stories within social contexts where they often find that they can make the most sense of those stories and that distress. So I wanted to say all of that hopeful stuff because it's so important that we connect, I think, with, you know, with that as well as the really difficult stuff. Now, you lot are definitely in for an informative and an inspiring day today. It will be impossible for that to not be the case because all the contributors are incredible and inspiring people. And they all, without exception, are working so hard on so many different levels to make changes to how we understand emotional distress and changes to challenge medical model thinking. And I am full of admiration for all of them and deeply grateful for all of their efforts. And as a result of their commitment, these people and other allies out there are some really tangible things to celebrate, much more than I can actually mention here. But I just want to mention a few. So the Power Threat Meaning Framework that offers an alternative way of understanding distress that takes into account social context is in the process of being translated into 7 different languages, including Korean, Japanese, Spanish, Norwegian and Danish, which is absolutely amazing. And Lucy and her colleagues, Power Threat Meaning Framework colleagues, continue to work really hard to promote it globally. And I think that is worth celebrating. The ECT campaigners that we heard from in detail last year at last year's festival continue to work really hard and make progress. They've had recent kind of media coverage criticising the practice of ECT. And as a result of all their hard work, that coverage has been in the Sunday Times, the Independent, Cosmopolitan, Metro. They've been on Women's Hour. That is definitely worth celebrating. AD4E speakers and allies have featured several times on Sky News. They've had articles published in The Guardian. They've been interviewed in The Times. That's definitely worth celebrating. And perhaps most importantly, or most significantly of all, AD4E speaker and supporter, Professor Joanna Moncrief, who'll be here later on a panel, along with her colleague, Mark Horowitz, released their scientific review exploding the myth of chemical imbalance, which was leading news on radio, TV, print media all over the world, finally putting one of the most powerful and long-standing lies of psychiatry to rest. That is definitely worth celebrating, and well done, and thank you to Joanna and Mark. And well done and thank you to every single one of you who is part of change, and part of the change which is surely on its way. So in usual AD4E style, we're going to start by playing Dr. Sana Asan's poem, Decolonising Distress, which I think John has got lined up and ready to go. And the reason we play this is because it just sets the tone for the day really quite perfectly. So thanks for listening, everyone, and hope you enjoy the poem, and I hope you enjoyed the whole day.
This world will tell you to keep your distress in sealed letters of lips behind shiny white envelopes that no one need read. They will stamp it with a diagnosis, label your suffering an illness. They will call it depression, while you call it the natural effect of oppression. They will feed you pills to cure social ills, medicate injustice. They will name the imbalance of power in society a chemical imbalance in your brain. They will refuse to understand the causes of your pain. They will attempt to colonize the earth of your mind with language your mother tongue cannot swallow, and you will be lost in translation, searching for Urdu subtitles so that your grandmother might understand. As they offer terms like anxiety disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, and you will wonder what this apparently ordered way of living is. A filing away of feelings into categories of cabinets that cannot be contained. But you must remember that this feeling is not a sickness. But you must remember that they once called homosexuality an illness of the mind. Remember that there was a time that they once labelled runaway slaves as mentally ill for desiring freedom. Remember that they still deem psychosis as a black disease. So please remember and keep feeling. Keep feeling. Cry on the tube in front of passing strangers. Wear the cuts on your thighs like beautifully inked tattoos. Put your sadness on like it is the silkiest shirt in your wardrobe. Two-step with the grief anchored to your feet like they're your freshest pair of Air Force Ones. So let your tears fall in protest. Release your rage in revolution to a world that is terrified of unfiltered and unedited truth. Do not dilute your heart. Gather community around the table so you can feast in this feeling. Let their sorrow and joy be a convoy to ride together out of this societal warfare. Show them that your tenderness packs muscle, that this tenderness is shared, that this suffering is to be understood at the collective, not only the individual perspective. There is healing to be found in our community. Phenomenal woman, I am in love with your tenderness. I am in love with our tenderness. So please, stay tender. Stay tender.
So I just want to thank Sana for that amazing poem, and also alert people to the Guardian article that Sana wrote last week with the headline, "I'm a psychologist and believe we've been told devastating lies about mental health," which actually went very viral. And so, my picture's frozen. I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yeah, loud and clear, okay. Joe. Everything's good
cool.
to you.
Yeah, so that actually went viral. So really encourage people to have a look at that. So I think Wesley's going to put that in the chat room now.